Welcome to the Sunriver Anglers Fly Tying Corner, where each month we bring you a new fly pattern to give a try to on our Central Oregon lakes and rivers. In addition to showing you how to tie each pattern, I'll feature fishing technique tips and tricks, and I'll cover some of the entomology behind each pattern to help gain a better understanding of the bugs that we're trying to imitate. I have field tested each of the patterns that I feature each month to make sure that they catch fish. I'll cover tying instructions for the fly as well as materials to help you be able to recreate these patterns on your own vise. It is late March here in Central Oregon, and as I look out my window of my office, I see snow coming down, but it won't be long until we're up on the lakes once again. And the most important early season fly patterns to focus on are Chironomids. Chironomids are really our first hatch of the season, and one of the most important hatches of the early season. So today I'm going to tie 4 different Chironomid patterns, and these are the ones I use on East Lake, on Crane Prairie. I use them up on Hosmer and Lava Lakes and so on and so forth. They're really important for fishing in the early season. So let me introduce you to the materials we're going to use to tie this series of Chironomid patterns. For a hook, I'm going to use a Daiichi Alec Jackson Chironomid hook. This is a size 11. It's more or less a scud hook with a turned up eye, and it has a chrome finish to it that's shiny and is really good for Chironomids. For the bead on this pattern, I'm using a white 3/32 brass bead. This is a painted white bead, and it helps imitate the gills on Chironomids. These patterns often go by the term snow cone patterns because of the white bead. For thread, I'm using an Ultra 140 denier thread, and you'll see several colors in the slide. I've got brown gray, I've got red, I've got olive, and I've got black, and I'll use each of these colors on the different patterns that I'm going to demonstrate today. I've got 2 different types of flash or tinsel. I'm going to use a Vivus holographic red tinsel, and then I'm also going to use Mirage tinsel in opal on differing patterns, and you'll see that as we go. For the ribbing on these flies, I'm going to use a fine wire, and I've got a couple different colors. I've got silver and I've got a dark bronze, and I'll use this wire selectively on each of the patterns as we go. And lastly, I'm going to finish each pattern with a coat of Solaris Bone Dry UV resin. And I've got both the Solaris Bone Dry in the picture, but also my UV curing light. And you'll see how that's applied on each of these patterns. So let's get started tying this Chironomid series. I'm going to start with the black and silver. This is a pretty simple fly to tie and very quick. All of these patterns are designed for newer fly tiers. I'm going to begin by tying in my thread right into the bead, and I'll build several layers of thread into the bead itself to go ahead and lock it in place. Then I'm going to lay a thread base layer all the way back to the entire body of this Chironomid. From here, I'll go ahead and tie in my silver wire, and I'll wrap that all the way back to about a third of the way down the bend of the hook. And I'll return my thread to the head or to the bead, and then I'll go ahead and wind 2 wraps right at the very tail end of the fly of my silver wire, and then I'll rib it forward and tie that off. I'll drop into a whip finish here and whip finish right at the head and clip off my thread. Lastly, I'm going to go ahead and coat this with my Solaris Bone Dry UV resin and then hit it with a light. So very simply, that is the black and silver Chironomid. So the next Chironomid pattern I'm going to tie is the black and red. This will almost duplicate the last one that we tied, except we're going to add a holographic tinsel red tag on this pattern. I'm going to start this pattern very similar to the way I started the last one, by laying down a thread base with several layers into the bead itself. Then I'll go ahead and tie in my silver wire, and I'll wrap that back to the back of the hook. And then I'll follow that up by wrapping in the red holo tinsel, and I'll wrap that back to the back of the hook. So I'll advance my thread from the back of the hook just a little ways up, and then I'll wind 2 wraps of my holographic red tinsel and tie that off and clip off the excess. So I'll cover up that excess red as much as I can and return my thread back up to the bead. And then we'll go ahead and start ribbing this pattern with the silver wire right up to the bead. And then I'll tie that off and clip off the excess. I'll drop into a whip finish here and whip finish right at the head and clip off my thread. I'll finish this fly with the same UV resin coating that I used on the black and silver. So that is the black and red Chironomid pattern. Another real good one and a slight variation from the first one I showed you. The next pattern I'm going to show you is probably my favorite. It's the olive and red Chironomid, and this is the easiest pattern to tie yet. Now I have two bobbins, one loaded with red thread and one with olive thread. So I'm going to start this pattern by tying on my red thread, and I'm going to lay a couple of layers all the way back to the bend of the hook. Return that up to the bead and go ahead and whip finish and clip off the red thread. Then I'm going to go ahead and tie in the olive thread right over the top of the red, and I'm going to wind that back in very sparse variegated wraps over the red thread. I want to leave lots of red showing through, but I want some olive to show through as well. And I'll return back to the head, whip finish that off, and clip off the excess. And lastly, I'll use my Solaris bone dry and finish off this fly just like the others by hitting it with my light. So that is the very easy to tie olive and red Chironomid, one of my favorites. So the final pattern we're going to tie today is the Chiromi, the Chiromi Chironomid. This is a unique stage of the Chironomid when they're beginning their ascent to the surface. They build gas bubbles to help them ascend to the surface and hatch. And when they do this, they get a very shiny look to the bug. And so we're going to imitate this by using tinsel and overwrapping it with ribbing to create the Chiromi. I'm going to begin this pattern by tying on my gray-brown thread right up at the bead. And then I'm going to go ahead and attach bronze wire. This is going to help with the segmentation on this pattern. And I'll tie that all the way back to the bend in the hook. And then I'm going to tie on my Mirage tinsel and again tie it all the way to the back of the hook. And then I'll immediately start winding that all the way forward up to the bead. And I'll tie that off, clip off the excess, and then wrap the wire segmentation all the way up to the bead and tie that off and clip off the excess. I'll drop into a whip finish here and whip finish right at the head and clip off my thread. And finally, we'll finish this fly with a coat of Solaris Bone Dry. Hit it with my UV light, and that will finish the chroming. This is a very good pattern for a distinct period when chironomids are beginning their ascent to the surface during a hatch period. So that has been your Sunriver Anglers Fly Tying Corner for this month. I hope you'll give this Chironomid series a try. These are often referred to as snow cone patterns. Very easy to tie and very effective. Thanks for tuning in this month, and we'll look forward to seeing you on future videos. Thanks for watching.